Hi, thanks so much. Apologies in advance if the sound quality or video quality isn't that good. I'm in a small town on the coast of Mexico now, so I'm not sure just how good my internet quality is. It cut out once already, unfortunately.
Okay, we can hear you fine.
We'll do what we can.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. What's that? It says it's unstable, but let's hope that's not too unstable. Thank you, everyone. In the preface to a 1580 translation of the most perennially popular late medieval text written in the Low Countries, Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ, Thomas Rogers draws on national stereotypes to justify his textual project. We should imitate Christ, he argues, partly because we are Englishmen, who of all other people are most famous and infamous too for imitation. After giving examples of classical authors the English shamefully choose to imitate instead of Christ, Cicero, Aristotle, Justinian, and Galen, he then writes how unfortunate it is that so many of his imitation-prone countrymen choose also to imitate the French in vanity, the Dutch in luxury, in bravery the Spanish, the papists in idolatry, and in impiety and all impurity of life the atheists. The aggressive national and sectarian stereotypes invoked here, including the association of the Dutch with unbridled lustfulness, are all relatively run-of-the-mill for the 16th century. In other late medieval and early modern pious texts, however, one finds instead a much more finely grained interest in the particularities of the Low Countries, from the mistaken belief in Jan van Ruysbroek's running a Carthusian monastery outside of Brussels, to the picaresque interest in the place names encountered during the journeys of a penitent former paramour of the devil. The devotional landscape of the pre-Reformation Netherlands and its environs was a significant component of English literary engagement with its closest continental neighbor. Portions of Jan van Ruysbroek's The Spiritual Espousals and The Sparkling Stone are both found in Middle English devotional treatises, although only the latter is attributed to him by the translator. The Spiritual Espousals, however, is instead used alongside a truly remarkable range of medieval and patristic sources by the author of the prose treatise, The Chastising of God's Children, probably written in the 1390s and found in several manuscripts, as well as printed by Wynkyn de Worde. Although the compiler author cites authorities ranging from Augustine, Gregory the Great, Jerome, John Chrysostom, and Isidore of Seville, to Thomas Aquinas, Hugh of St. Victor, Pseudo Bonaventure, and Aelred of Ribot, along with brief mentions of legends about St. Hildegard of Bingen and Bridget of Sweden, his use of excerpts from Henry Suso's Horologium Sapientiae and a Latin translation of Ruysbroek's Spiritual Espousals is silent. The treatise of the Perfection of the Sons of God, on the other hand, present in only one manuscript, is introduced as being compiled by Don John Ruysbroek, the first prior of the Charterhouse in Vale Viridi juxta Bruxellam. This misassociation of Ruysbroek with the Carthusian order, despite the accurate Latinization and localization of Groenendael, is not unusual in insular texts. Marlene Cray and others have noticed that the Latin rendering of the Paris Charterhouse at Vauvert may have led to some of the confusion, and Michael Sargent suggests perhaps a parochial interest in Ruysbroek and promoting him among English Carthusians. Another insular reference to Ruysbroek, the Carthusian, is found in a unique Middle English miscellany, dating from the 1520s and produced in East Yorkshire's Hull Charterhouse. Oxford Bodleian Library, MSA Museo 160, begins with, and is dominated by, a prosometric devotional history of the world, a relatively loose translation of the Cologne Carthusian Werner Roelevink's Latin prose universal history, the Fasciculus Temporum. First published in 1474, the Fasciculus Temporum would be published in over 50 editions in multiple languages across Europe. The Yorkshire Carthusian author, however, adds significant material on English, Yorkshire, and Carthusian history. He also updates Roelevink's text to the year 1518. The The author-translator's interest in continental saints and devotional authors is also noteworthy. One of his prayers at the end of the section on the 14th century, the history is divided up into chapters, each chapter about 1 century, ending with a litany requesting the intercession of saints from that century, or in the case of the 15th century, complaining that there aren't too many saints. Alongside, at the end of the 14th century, single or double line mentions of Bridget of Sweden, Vincent Ferrer, Catherine of Siena, and others. The author asks for the intercession of John Ruysbroek, devout, illuminat, and well learned. Above Ruysbroek's name, likely in another hand, is added the hopeful, if false, interlinear identification of the hallowed author as a fellow charter monk. An entry likely for Gerd Grote, or perhaps the Carthusian Gerard of Herne, as both are associated with Ruysbroek and Groenendael, immediately preceding Ruysbroek's, has also been altered. The original line, legible as Sancte Gerarde Confessor and Doctor, has had Doctor crossed out and Great Clerk added above the line. The universal history as a whole seems to have been imagined in a robustly interactive fashion. Space is left at the end of each century's litany for additional saints to be added by later readers, and these two annotated interventions are far from unique, even as they demonstrate a concern for the specifics of 14th century Dutch mystical writing. Hagiography, rather than mysticism, let alone universal history, offered the late medieval vernacular English reader in search of spiritual edification still greater detail about the devotional life and geography of the Low Countries. The Middle English lives of Elizabeth of Spalbeck, Christina Mirabilis, and Maria Vonier, raised in Nivelles, for instance, are found uniquely in Oxford Bodleian Library MS Dowse 114. The manuscript also bears unique witness to a Middle English translation of a hagiographic letter testifying to the sanctity of Catherine of Siena, as well as the 7 Points of True Love and Everlasting Wisdom, translation of Henry Suso's Horologium Sapientiae. The three lives, translated from Latin between 1425 and 1450 into Middle English, offer an intricate picture of female asceticism and sanctity in the environs of Liège, often with significant attention to the place names the three holy women encountered. The incipit of the manuscript's first life, that of Elizabeth of Spalbeck, localizes her in the Sheer of Losse, beside an abbey of nonnes that is called Herkenrode. The life itself then continues and begins by setting her in the province of Leodi, beside a famous abbey of nonnes of Sistens order, that is called Herkenrode, 6 mile or 7 from the city of Leodi. Leodi, that is Liège, is 44 kilometers from Herkenrode, the Cistercian abbey itself a brisk hour's walk from present-day Spalbeck on the outskirts of Hasselt. Jennifer Brown, the most recent editor of the text, notes that the manuscript's initial reference to Losse seems to be a mistranslation of the source text's Leodi, a curious mistake given the immediate repetition of the phrase correctly in the first sentence. The desire to create realism in the text, even through linguistic specificity, is found as well, albeit via the Latin intermediary, in a pair of Dutch words Elizabeth of Spalbeck was reported to have said, zoete Heer, that is to say in English, sweet Lord. So an attempt to replicate zoete. The life of Christina the Astonishing, too, begins with the geography of the saint's life. Here beginneth the prologue in the leaf of Saint Christine the Marvelous, of the tomb of Saint Trudos in Hasban. The town of Saint Truden and the province name are soon repeated twice more. One of her many ascetic marvels involves the local river, the Maas. She abode often and long under the water of the flood of Moise. In another episode, she runs to a church in a town that is called Wellen, still called Wellen today, and dives into the uncovered baptismal font. Shortly thereafter, she prophesies an exceedingly bloody battle between the Duke of Brabant and his adversaries, wherein a place that is called a Stepis, so many hundredth of men were slain. That is a battle in 1213 of Steps, about 13 kilometers south of Zintpruden. She later goes unto a castel in the marches of Allemagne that is called Lune, present-day Borglund in Limburg, to live with a female solitary. She is then visited by the Earl of Lune on account of her sanctity. Another chapter begins with an account of a visit between the Earl of Lune as he lay in his palace at Lune that is now destroyed with the Duke of Lumborgense, an acknowledgement of the time past between Christina's life and the composition of the life, as well as the depth of aristocratic approval of Christina. She later hears the Duke's deathbed confessions of all of his sins since the age of 11, although the hagiographer is very careful to clarify that she does not, of course, offer absolution. The life of the third of this trio of Belgian saints, Marie of Oignies, again opens with a localization of the saint's home to the bishopric of Léodie, in this instance in a town that is called Nivelles, a village next to Nivelles, central to her life, Willambroek or Willambroek, is mentioned many times, as is its specific location beside Nivelles, and later on multiple references to her cell beside the church of Oignies. Leuven is also critical to her life, as the hagiographer recounts an encounter with some of the men of the Duke of Leuven, and at the end of her life, a story of the former wife of the Duke of Louvagny is described living about Cologne, fair for our country. Another story takes place in a church of St. Gertrude in a village that is Clepid Latilos. Jennifer Brown identifies this as Lillois, 6 kilometers from present-day Nivelles. Finally, in one instance, geographical information given in the Latin source text is simply garbled by the Middle English translator, although the rarity of errors of this kind itself is quite revealing of the precision of the translator, even when dealing with relatively unfamiliar place names. A manuscript reading of Cassinier in the Middle English is amended by both of the text's modern editors on the basis of the Latin source text to Trasenier, referring to the modern-day Trasenier just outside of Charleroi. The production of both secular and devotional English texts in Antwerp during the opening decades of the 16th century led to an even wider range of Dutch place names available to lay English readers. Although the bulk of the press's output was not particularly Netherlandish in character, even so, some significant monuments of Dutch and German literature found their first English translation at the hands of the Antwerp printers. English texts from Jan van Doesburg's press, about whom we'll be hearing more soon, include the 15 Tokens, an English translation of a Dutch treatise on the 15 signs thought to presage the end of the world, the life of Virgilius on the legendary life of Virgil as a sorcerer and necromancer, Frederick of Yennen, a translation of a tale about a merchant's wife who went like a man and became a great lord and falconer to the king of Cairo, Till Hulleglas, the first appearance of Till Eulenspiegel in English, and the Parson of Kallenborg. Perhaps the most remarkable production of the printing press of Jan van Doesburg, however, is Mary of Nijmegen. It survives today in a unique copy in the Huntington Library, illustrated with woodcuts as well. This text's peculiar blend of the picaresque, devotional, hagiographic, and theatrical is a loose prose adaptation of a prosometric Dutch rhetorician play, Marieken van Nijmegen, although Elkerlijk and Everyman is, of course, the best known instance of Dutch drama translated for an English reading public. Mary, most recently edited in 2016, demonstrates a far more detailed interest in the geography of the Low Countries and its penitential relationship to Cologne and Rome. The Dutch play, Marieken van Nijmegen, recounts the journey of a young woman lodging with her uncle, a priest, into Nijmegen to go shopping. Not able to return by nightfall, She visits an aunt in town to ask for a night's stay. The aunt refuses, insinuating that Mary has been sexually promiscuous, perhaps even with her own uncle. The aunt later stabs herself to death, upset by the escape of the Duke of Arent from his imprisonment by his son, Duke Adolf, and egged on by the devil, which helpfully dates the initial action of the play to 1465, although it continues up until the year 1500. Heading to a hedge on the outskirts of town while she laments her state, it's saying my internet connection is unstable again, but let's keep trucking, and hence with you, Satan. She's approached by the demon Munin, who offers her knowledge of the 7 liberal arts and all languages in exchange for concubinage. He convinces her, however, not to request necromancy as well, on one condition, that she change her name from Mary, because how can you sleep with a Mary? She resists initially, but ultimately settles on retaining just one letter, becoming Emmekin, that is to say, little m. After 7 years of this arrangement, she travels to Nijmegen again. She happens to see a play being performed in the town square, in which Mary and Jesus discuss their limitless compassion for repentant sinners in the face of another devil's temptation. The affective power of the performance convinces her to reject Munin, the demon. He angrily transforms, seizes her in his claws, flies far above the town, and drops her to her death. Miraculously unhurt, she and her uncle decide to seek absolution, ultimately in Rome. The Pope absolves her, but demands as penance that 3 heavy iron rings be welded onto her neck and arms. Only when they are removed by natural erosion will she be free of her especially grievous sins. She joins a fictional convent of converted sinners in Maastricht on the return trip from Rome, and through decades of steadfast post-demon fucking devotion, an angel eventually visits her in a dream to remove the rings. The English version of 1518, that is only 3 years after the extant Dutch version we have, is somewhat briefer, although the plot remains fundamentally identical. Throughout, however, the author-translator maintains the wealth of geographical detail found in the Dutch version, as well as the regional political conflict of the mid-15th century, which creates some of the interfamilial friction. Indeed, the Middle English tale begins, "In the time when Duke Arent was taken of his son Adolf and his host, the same team dwelled in the land of Gelders, 3 mile from Nijmegen, a devout priest called Sir Gijsbrecht." After the initial meeting with the devil, here changed from Munin to Satan with the one ear, they go together first to Sertogenbosch, the Middle English spelling of Sertogenbos, and then to Antwerp. After an interlude of 1 year reveling in Sertogenbos, they arrive in Antwerp and go to the Gilden Tray on the marketplace for binge drinking and murder, or the Middle English text refers to variously revel and misrule, living viciously and sinfully, and committing much mischief and manslaughter. The specificity of the very tavern in the main square where they choose to lodge for 6 years helps to bolster the boisterous reputation of the mercantile hub as Satan and Emmekin perform various spectacles and crimes and fleecing barflies and whatnot, which still goes on in Antwerp, I think. After 6 years at the Golden Tree, Emmekin suddenly decides she'd like to visit her uncle and other friends back in the land of Helder, and Satan agrees to go with her. They arrive, as in the Dutch text, in Nijmegen during the annual performance of a play. Instead of the Dutch text's presentation of a full scene of a play within a play, here the narrator simply reports that the play was of sinful living, and there she saw her living played before her face. Then she began to be sorry and take repentance. Satan again attempts to kill her, and her uncle, also present at the play, witnesses her miraculous survival. The uncle's conjuring breaks Satan's hold on her, but not even the most learned of all of Nijmegen can absolve her or give appropriate penance. They journey to Cologne. The bishop there admits he's unable to absolve her, And then they finally arrive in Rome, and the Pope himself hears her confession. After much prayer on how to absolve her of 7 years of cohabitation with the devil and the deaths of 200 victims, he settles on the 3 iron rings. Her uncle then takes her, in the Middle English, to the Toon of Maastricht, where was a nunnery of nuns of St. Magdalena's order called Converted Sinners. After 24 years of prayer and obedience, an angel appears in a dream and brings Emmeken to heaven, where a flock of doves strike off the rings with their wings. She awakens to find the rings miraculously removed. The text concludes with a final appeal to the reader on the truthfulness of the story, laden with geographic specificity. All this in this book contained is for a truth, and if that ye will not believe me, that was the first mocker of this book, if that it fortune any of you for to go into the land of Flanders, to a town called Maastricht, and go to the nunnery of the converted sinners, there shall ye say Emmeken's grave, and also the iron ringes hanging thereover, and underneath written her living and also her penance. The emphasis on the veracity of the story, even to the point of encouraging pilgrims to seek out her fictional grave in Maastricht, is, as in the lives of the three female saints of Douce 114, dependent in part upon the repeated details of Flemish, Brabantine, and Brabantine geography present throughout the text. And just to conclude, I know I'm running low on time, the appearance of Dutch personal names, authors, linguistic references, and place names in the English literary tradition of this period has, of course, been explored elsewhere. In mystical and devotional literature, however, the range of attention paid by author-translators to the specificities of Netherlandish devotion is especially striking. From the anonymous, silent use of large portions of Ruysbroek's spiritual espousals, to the incredibly detailed holy geography of Mary of Nijmegen's deal with the devil, devout English readers in the 15th and early 16th century could go on an intricate imaginative pilgrimage to a non-existent tomb in Maastricht, learn of miraculous levitation and submersion in the environs of Liège, unwittingly find themselves reading words from Groenendaal, or even pray for the intercession of a Dutch Carthusian who never was. Thank you for your attention.